heard it. Teenage unemployment in urban centers, i.e. black teenage unemployment, much, much higher than white teenage unemployment, right? So who's really suffering from this, right? It's African-American teenagers who are priced out of the labor market as a result. Now, I wanted to put up a graph with respect to the distribution and level of wealth since the early 19th century. And it's a magnificent graph, and it's almost impossible for me to explain, which is why this is so important. But what it shows is the number of people alive. How many, like, it gives, on the x-axis, it gives you income, an income level. And then on the y-axis, going vertical, it says millions of people. So, at 1820, how many millions of people are making this wage, and this wage? And you see this big arc, right? Later on, in the actually in 1970, you see the arc move, which means we've gotten wealthier. The arc goes like this, and then it comes back down, and then it goes back up. In other words, you have a growing inequality. There's a big chunk of people who are still relatively poor, but then in the developed world, Western Europe and America, there's a big group of people who are relatively wealthy. You update that to 2010, and it's become much more round again. It's pushed out, gotten bigger, and it's become round again. So, you know, there's many different facets to the question you asked there, but with respect to like inequality to that branch, on a worldwide scale, the world's becoming much more equal. Over the last 40 years. Since 1970, the world is becoming much more equal. The gap between the poorest people and the richest people, the richest people haven't increased their rates of consumption or income at the rate that the poorest people have. Poor people have increased, the poorest people have increased their rates of consumption at twice the rate that rich people have over the last 30 years. So, yes, there is still an imbalance, and certainly in America, you know, that's one of the hot button issues of inequality. As you know, you said in one of my classes, I talk a lot about that. Monetary policy plays a factor in inequality. There are many causal factors, a lot to discuss there, but the simple fact of the matter is that on a worldwide scale, inequality is decreasing. And as a matter of fact, there's a wonderful paper called Real Inequality in Europe by Hoffman and Linder that discusses, look, inequality in Europe increased from 1500 to 1800. And it shows that the basket of goods that poor people buy became more expensive, and the basket of goods that rich people buy became less expensive. In 1800, it turned around. In 1800, inequality shrank in England. That's where they're looking at the numbers from. Economic growth tends to have that. I mean, it's completely counterintuitive and against everything the popular narratives you hear in the media, but economic growth actually tends to have that effect of decreasing rates of inequality. It brings the bottom up much more quickly than it increases the top. I mean, that's just what the numbers bear, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we look at sociological research, it says the complete opposite. It says the poor are getting poorer, the rich are getting richer, and it has a huge disparity. So I mean, I wonder.
I'd love to see this. I'd love to see that.
But the historical comparison, and I read that time and time and time when this stuff comes in, where people on that side will say that's absurd. Right.
The historical comparison.
The historical comparison, like what you started with, and the 700. No. But that's what's on that. I mean, I read the journals and the articles, and this is the big debate, which I talked about at the beginning. You know, this big
Dan, let me put it this
discourse that we're having. But I just read
absurd because it's so much.
I just read it recently.
And discredit the evidence.
But I just read it over in the weekend in the Sunday New York Times. I mean, I read people that you hold cherish dearly. You know.
Sure. I'll tell you what. But
they brought up that historical comparison, the Louis the white guy, Louis the French guy. The 700,000 square foot mansion, right? They didn't have baths.
You can decide for yourself. Is that an absurd historical comparison? Is it absurd to compare the fact that if you were born 400 years ago, your average life expectancy was 35 years, with the fact that today it's 8 years? Is that absurd? I mean, I don't think that's absurd at all. It's like, I want to explain why that happened. You can't just ignore it because it runs counter to this narrative that people are getting poor, the poor people are getting poor and the rich are getting richer. Why did that happen? mean, that's the point here. Why did that happen? If you just want to ignore it, well, fine. But that's no way to be a scientist. That's no way to be a, research something. So, people say it's absurd. Actually, I haven't heard that, but it's to me, it's not absurd. I'm very grateful that I was born in the 20th century. To me, I'm super grateful. There's not a day that goes by where I don't think, my gosh, like, I get a hankering for ice cream. I can get up and go to Market and get it right now. Be grateful for that little stuff. I mean, not just the, obviously vaccinations. Worried about dying of tuberculosis. I mean, anybody worried about your kids dying of TB? No, you should be grateful for that. And that's, I think, a relevant thing because the vast majority of all people in the history of this world have lived in that kind of poverty. Right. And we don't. That's right. We don't. Oh, it's absurd. Ignore that, because it doesn't run with our narrative about the story we want to tell. I mean, I wouldn't trust anything that comes out of somebody's mouth that's saying that afterwards. Because they want to discredit. Obviously, no one's evidence. Yeah.
You read this stuff.
I'm not jumping into it. I mean, don't you think that that's relevant? Okay, we share on this. Yeah, okay, Kim, what do you think? Anyway,
remember, she teaches sociology.
And no, Lisa, in all seriousness, I'd like to.
I wasn't trying to discredit what you're
I know
saying.
you're not.
He's doing discipline.
No. But I wanted to tell. I mean, this is about you. This is about the students, and these are the big things, and this is what there's both sides of this stuff, and unfortunately, I guess I could close on, and we could close on is we live in these ideological echo chambers, okay, and sadly, there's no middle ground. I would point to the work of Cornel West and Robbie George. Totally on both sides. They teach seminars each semester. They go out to college students. If you get a chance to go to C-SPAN, Google Robbie George and Cornel West, they sit down and they discuss these things from both spectrums, and they're hardcore. They're Princeton people, so they're no slouches. They're not crackpot, whacked out, But they sit down, and I think that's the discussions we need to be having. Both sides need to sit down and discuss these things because what we're doing here in sociology, in history, in economics is dealing with the human condition, right? These are human, markets are human constructs, right? And they affect, right, people's conditions, right? That's it.
That's great. Thank you for coming very much.
Thank you very much.